I am Tamar Ish Shalom, and this is Jewish Crossroads. There's a famous quote by Marian Wright Edelman, "You can't be what you can't see." And yet, some people manage to become what they never saw growing up as kids. Rabbi Sara Hurwitz is one of them. From a young age, she knew she was drawn to public service in the world of Torah and modern Orthodox Jewish life. In 2009, she was ordained by Rabbi Weiss and Rabbi Daniel Sperber, a groundbreaking moment that sparked intense debate and opposition within the modern Orthodox world. But Rabbi Hurwitz doesn't focus on confrontation. She focuses on change. She is the co-founder and president of Yeshivat Maharat, the first Orthodox institution to ordain women as rabbis, and she serves as Rabbah at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. She's been named one of the 50 most influential Jewish leaders by The Forward and one of Newsweek's 50 most influential rabbis. I'm honored to welcome her today to Jewish Crossroads. Shalom, Rabbi Hurwitz.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Tamar. Wonderful to be here.
Before we dive into the conversation about the current moment and its impact on your community as a whole, I want to take you back to 2009, the first woman ordained as an Orthodox rabbi. What led you to that moment and what made it possible?
I don't think I woke up and said, I'm going to be a rabbi one day. I didn't have that aha moment because, as you said so beautifully, you can't be what you can't see. It's a phrase that I use often and say it often, and I couldn't see it. There was no model of Orthodox women in clergy. And so I knew that I wanted to be part of the Jewish community. I knew that I loved learning Torah. And after learning seriously for several years, I started working at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, the Bayit, with Rabbi Weiss as an intern. Nobody knew what we were interning for, like not even a rabbinic intern. But after being there for a year, I loved it. And Rabbi Weiss and I started dreaming about what it would look like to be seen and accepted as a full member of the clergy team. And one thing we knew for sure is that I would have to go back to the books and keep learning. The language of halakha and gemara is the language of authority. And so I would have to become a master or an expert-ish, right? Because as a rabbi, we're always learning, an expert on halakha. And after spending 5 more years learning while I was still serving at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, doing life cycle events, teaching Torah classes, drashot, I finished my tests. Rabbi Sperber, in one of the scariest moments, tested me. Other rabbis tested me, written tests, oral tests. And I turned to Rabbi Weiss and I said, okay, 5 years later, I did it. I finished all the tests. Now what? And I think we could have just kept at it. I could have just quietly kept serving at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. I had learned by then that now that people could see me, they were now seeing me as their clergy, as their rabbinic leader. So that question had been answered. They were coming to me for life cycle events. But I wanted to give other women an opportunity to have a formal credentialed trajectory and pathway to do the same thing. And so I allowed Rabbi Weiss to, and together we decided to create a public ceremony where I would get ordained. And it was there that other people said, okay, how do I do this? How do I sign up?
How challenging was it to face the significant pushback surrounding your ordination? I mean, it's very clear you weren't looking for confrontation. You were looking for meaning and for a vocation in life. But confrontation came.
In those early days, I wanted to crawl under the covers and stay there. There were moments where I remember I was sitting at my desk, the phone rang, I picked it up, and somebody said, "You're destroying the Orthodox community." And just like you said, I didn't want to be a destroyer. I wanted to be part of building something. I think what got me through those early years is, first of all, Rabbi Weiss was and continues to be such a central and important supporter and advocate. Really, he gave up so much in the support of this vision and of me personally. And so in addition to him, he always says, as long as you have a strong base, a strong foundation. And so it was important that The people in this bayit and the Hebrew Institute were supportive. The board of the synagogue was supportive. And then those first few students who we'd already recruited and were on their journey were there and learning towards their own credentialed pathway. And so I think what got me through is the recognition that with one step in front of another, moving forward, change would happen, along with the fact that I had a tremendous, not large, but really important base of support locally here, not only with my immediate family, but in the synagogue.
The solid support. And the next stage, as you said, was making sure you wouldn't be the first and last women. Tell me about the founding of Maharat.
Well, I looked around and saw that there were fantastic women who were trying to and figuring out to lead, but it was very lonely. And I wanted to provide a support system to help them do it more seamlessly. I realized that if I could create a container, space to educate and hold them and support them, it could be a little less lonely. And I realized that not drawing from 100% of the population at a time where community needs its leaders and relies on rabbis as resources not only for Torah but for inspiration, it would be chaval, it would be terrible to not draw from the incredible learned women who simply wanted to serve and contribute and do the work of Avodat HaKodesh, of holy work.
How many women have been ordained through Maharat?
We are in our 16th year. We're about to graduate our largest class of 25 women. As that 25th woman will walk underneath the banner in which they become officially ordained, we will hit 100. We'll have 100 women out in the field serving in different capacities.
You said different capacities. How many of them lead congregations? And how many congregations are open to receive these female rabbis?
So the graduates are in education positions, in schools, in religious schools, in Orthodox schools, day schools. They're chaplains in hospitals. They're on university campuses doing organizational work, and many are in Orthodox pulpits. I just want to say that at the beginning, this was the highest and hardest ceiling, and so the first few graduates really did go into assistant pulpit positions. We learned very early on that the trajectory of ascending and climbing the ladder to senior positions wasn't as straight up as we thought it would be. It's much more of a curve with twists and turns. And over the last few years, we've been really putting a lot of energy and resources into supporting women to achieve senior level positions as well. And so to answer your question directly, we have, I think, about 8 women in assistant positions right now. And we actually have 16 women in senior pulpits, either synagogues that they've founded themselves, that they've built from the ground up, like Rabbi Dasi Fruchter in South Philadelphia, Stiebel, has created a vibrant community there, or some students who have built their own communities in France and England. We're a global institution, or women who have co-leadership positions with male colleagues, like Rabbi Alyssa Thomas with Rabbi Natty Helfgott in New Jersey, or Rav Tanya Barber, who is in Washington Heights in the base. And then we have Orthodox women who have been hired by Orthodox congregations as their senior rabbi, like Rabbi Leah Sarna. So change is happening.
And 16 years have passed. Do you see the effects of that move today in the broader Orthodox community? I mean, after all, in the vast majority of communities, a woman still would be accepted as a rabbi. But did it perhaps open the door to other forms of inclusion of women?
I'm really proud of the impact and the trickle effect that has occurred with the opening of Yeshivat Maharat. We just did a landscape scan just for our own internal use. And when we started in 2009, and even several years later, there was barely any opportunities of higher learning for Orthodox women. Certainly few that had smicha attached to it, or just higher level degrees of learning. And if they did, it was very quiet, and it was sort of like very understated. And I think when we started ordaining women and when we started giving them titles, there was a shift, and other institutions in Israel, in America, started embracing an idea of a degree. Maybe it wasn't called smicha, but it was called something else, but it was very similar to that degree. And Orthodox women started calling themselves rabbinit or whichever other title made sense for them, in recognition that having a degree and a title gave the authority that they all deserved.
Let's talk about October 7th. We've spoken quite a lot on this podcast about the awakening many American Jews had regarding Israel. People who hadn't felt connected to the state rediscovered that connection after October 7th, and others rediscovered their Jewish identity, a part of their life that hadn't held much significance before, what we've come to call October 8th Jews. But I'm curious to hear, what did modern Orthodox Jews in America discover about themselves? After all, they already had strong Jewish identities and deep ties to Israel before October 7th and the war.
It's been a really rough 18 months. Let's just start there. I'm heartbroken, as we all are. One thing that I've noticed is that there is no homogeneous modern Orthodox community. And I know that's true for every denomination, and to say that there's one kind of Orthodox Jew is not true. And I would say the biggest surprise was the multiplicity of voices that emerged even from within the modern Orthodox community with respect to thoughts and feelings about Israel, the war. And I guess what I saw is the immediate after effect of the war in those early months. There was a swarm of gathering and coming together and crying together. Shul and communities became a tremendous place of support. You know, we were doing fine after COVID in terms of our pews, but people we hadn't seen came back. I think people were seeking religious guidance, were seeking leadership. They were looking for their rabbis to lead tefillot or to bring to mind the hostages, to just gather and pray together. And then I think, like the rest of the community, the war got complicated, and I was surprised to see the splitting and the fracturing even within the modern Orthodox community of the diversity of opinions. And the truth is, in hindsight, I shouldn't be surprised because, you know, the modern Orthodox community reflects the large swath of where Jews are, their political thoughts. And I think that was a wake-up call for not only the Jewish community, but for the modern Orthodox community as well.
Orthodox Jews are generally more inclined to vote Republican, according to polls, but I imagine that in a liberal community in New York, there are community members on both sides of the political map. With polarization in the U.S. reaching new highs in recent years, have recent elections affected internal relationships within the community in any way? And as a rabbi, how do you handle this sensitive issue?
I think about this question deeply, not only as a rabbi in front of a congregation, but also because I want my students to learn and see multiple models of what leadership means through this difficult time so that they can develop and find their own rabbinic voice once they get out into the field, even before. I think that it has been my job to really try to, I don't know, these words sound trite, but to make space and to hold space. And I think really what I mean by that is to not impose my own values, especially if they're on either extreme, but to lead with Torah and to lead with tefillah rather than leading with politics or leading with ideas that are polarizing. That's not always easy to do, and I think we can't avoid and should not avoid talking about the topics that are most on people's minds and hearts. And so when, Hirsch died, I spoke about it. When every trip I went to Israel, and I went 3 times in very close succession right after October 7th, I spoke about what I saw and what I felt and what I learned. But I did it through the eyes of the people I engaged with, through their voices, and always interspersed and framed in the wisdom of our Torah. And I think that's our job, is to always be lifting up and elevating whatever is on people's minds, but giving them a framework to try to navigate the difficult, both emotional feelings, but also like their cerebral thoughts on whatever topic they're navigating through.
I imagine you encountered people debating whether to wear a visible kippah or cover it with a baseball cap, or women who suddenly felt more vulnerable because of their head covering. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. I never imagined, I've been in New York for so long. I went to Barnard, Columbia. The Upper West Side was my place. And to hear people on the subways and on the Upper West Side worried about how they looked and whether they should wear their kippah or not was so distressing. I think what I see, especially in my community, is an embracing of identity more than anything else. It's almost embarrassing if you're not wearing a necklace that has some thought about our hostages, and I haven't taken my necklace off, or the tag that people wear. The modern interpretations of a Magen David, or the little outline of the land of Israel, I feel like that's mostly where I've seen people go, is that their expression of pride and Jewish identity has, had them embrace who they are as Jews and not to cover. But I fully respect those who have told me that it's scary. It is a very scary time. I was just driving, and I was at a stoplight, and somebody spat at me. And, I covered my hair. I was wearing a scarf. My husband and I joke around that, like, if you put a baseball cap on, like, nobody will know that we're Orthodox. But, like,
If you're a woman.
Yeah, you could tell. You could tell. There's just a look, whether it's a scarf or a hat or a fall. You could tell. I'll never know why that person spat at me, but I can't imagine thinking that, I represented something that led that person to feel anger and distaste, and I felt really sad. I also just want to say, like, college campuses, I have 20-year-old twin boys, and one of them is on a college campus that has so much Jewish pride. The other one is in Israel, so he's like already at the center of it. But the one who's on a college campus, he will not back down. He wears his tzitzit and his kippah proudly. If there's a protest, he would much rather engage and have a conversation with somebody than run away. Mm-hmm. I think they have a foundation of pride that propels them forward.
And sometimes eating ice cream is part of Tikkun Olam and combating anti-Semitism. Could you tell us that story?
Yeah. We got word that one of the Jewish stores in Scarsdale had anti-Semitic slang spray painted on it. And, it was a school day. I had a lot of work to do, meetings. My students are sitting in the Beit Midrash and learning. And I just realized that actually what Torah is about is getting up and going and being present. And so I gathered whoever was around, and we jumped into the car and we drove to Scarsdale, and we just bought ice cream, and we stood there, and there was a gathering of Jews from across denominations, and it felt good to say we're here, and we're not going to be afraid or scared off by the slogans that and the fear that you're trying to imbue in us. We're going to show up, and we're going to eat ice cream.
I guess that what's unique about Orthodox Jews, and of course Haredim, ultra-Orthodox as well, is the fact, as you mentioned, that you can't hide your identity. In public, you can never pass as a non-Jew. You can't conceal your religious identity when walking down the streets, unlike the experience of many non-Orthodox Jews. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, how has this shaped or changed the Jewish identity of Orthodox Jews over the past year, when these, external markers now come with a cost, and sometimes it's a high one? I mean, does it affect the identity itself in any way?
I just see people leaning more into it in my community. I think the more identifiers, the better. Just 2 years ago, I mean, did people walk around with like shiny Magen Davids? No, I mean, I don't know. It wasn't so hip to wear a Magen David, and now like that's the jewelry and design of choice. I think I see mostly more pride. And of course, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, I see the other side too, the struggle of especially young Orthodox Jews want to embrace fully their identity as Jews and Zionists and Orthodox halachic Jews, and just are so despondent about the choices that the Israeli government is employing and the death that this war has caused. It's a struggle, and you know what? It's a struggle that religious Jewish leaders have to hold. I mean, it's sort of our tough kid, whether we like it or not, our job to take it on a little bit. I know that we can't solve it, but at least to provide an opportunity for our constituents to struggle through that. Mm-hmm. It's not something I enjoy.
You grew up in the golden era of American Jewry, when it was obvious that, one could be both an observant Jew and a patriotic American, and that the American dream includes Jews. Have the past 18 months shaken that belief for you? Is there a sense of heartbreak over the American dream failing Jews in a way, in light of the massive wave of anti-Semitism?
Well, first I want to say that I am an immigrant myself. So I'm South African, mm-hmm. and I have a tremendous gratitude and respect for the ability to become an American citizen and the opportunities that I have had since I've been in this country. I mean, I was only 12, grateful that my parents made that choice for us, and all the opportunities that I got. But I start there because I think, have an outsider's perspective as well of gratitude for being an American. I think more than disappointed, I'm shocked and a little bit scared. It's really surprising to look at the media and see the hate on college campuses and the discourse. It's just, you can't help but like hear murmurings of 1939, and those stories are embedded in our DNA. And to say like, not us, not now, this isn't happening. I mean, that's what our ancestors were saying, our grandparents were saying, our great-grandparents. And I think that I'm more than disappointed. I don't have a lot of trust, and I'm afraid of what I'm seeing.
How do you see the future of modern Orthodox in the U.S.?
Well, I wouldn't be a rabbi if I wasn't a little bit of an optimist. So let me just say that I think there is beauty in the middle, and being able to hold deeply onto a tradition that has grounded me and grounded us and the foundation from which we stand. And while on the other hand, sort of grasping towards progress and a world and a life that is filled with opportunities and inclusivity. And I really actually buy into that. I think the arc of history is long, and if you just stay in it and with it, the needle always turns back to progression. And that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be major dips, and history has shown us that there's been very scary times of where progress did not win the day. But if you look at the arc of history, it always travels in the right direction. And so that's where I see it going eventually.
Let's talk a bit about the relationship between religious Zionism in Israel, what we call in Hebrew kippah sruga or tzionut datit, and American modern Orthodoxy, and the mutual influences. And I want to begin dafka, in particular, with the American influence on Israel, an influence you've personally contributed to, which is a change in women's roles in the community, which isn't happening only here. There has been amazing developments in Israel over the past 2 decades. Actually, journalist Chenat Yisrael even wrote a fascinating book about it. So for our Hebrew-speaking listeners, this is a warm recommendation for Hadatiot HaChadashot, the new female Orthodox. She focuses on the role of social media in bringing about this change. But the influence of American Judaism is very clear as well. I mean, the institute you founded and lead, Maharat, has a branch in Israel. And when you visit a liberal or egalitarian Orthodox synagogue in Israel, you can really feel the strong presence of Israelis with an American background. How do you experience this circle of influence, and how important is it to you?
I'm so glad that there's a bridge between American community, religious community, and America. First of all, let me just say that Maharat is global, and we have 30 growing alumni graduates in Israel. And that is significant because there are women in Israel who could go to places in Israel and have wonderful learning opportunities and experiences, but they choose to get their education from Maharat, from an American-based institution. And I think that they do that because we're trying to not only give smicha, but create a movement of like-minded Jews, women, men, who are supporting this inevitable move towards Orthodox women serving and leading. And I think that doesn't just stop at giving a degree. I think it includes supporting them in their careers, in their teaching, in the Talmud Torah, and giving them opportunities to write, to share their wisdom in all ways. And so I'm actually also fascinated by the fact that Israelis who are born in Israel and many American Israelis who have found their way to Maharat. And I think it speaks to this bridge that there is certainly a lot of differences, but even more ways in which there are similarities and like-mindedness that bring us together. I think it's actually like important for the future of the diaspora Jewry and Israeli Jewry to have as many bridges as possible. If that bridge is, rallies around Orthodox women's leadership and religious leadership, call it kavod. I think that's a good thing.
Well, talking about bridges, I recently read a book by Professor Noah Feldman, To Be a Jew Today, and he dedicates a fascinating chapter to American modern Orthodoxy, the world he grew up in, and he makes some interesting observations that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. He points out the change in the centrality of Israel for modern Orthodox Jews, particularly the sharp rise starting in the late 1980s in the number of young American Orthodox Jews who spend a year studying in religious Zionist institutions in Israel, the gap year. And he argues this led to a strong ideological and political influence of Israeli religious Zionism on American Orthodoxy. And it also changed the centrality of Israel in American Orthodox Jewish education, strengthening it. How do you see this influence and dialogue between the two communities?
I see it in two ways. The influence is really there. I just want to share also a reaction to the past 18 months. As I mentioned, my twin boys had their Shana Aleph gap years last year, not this past year. One of those is Shana Bet. And the number of their peers who are choosing to stay in Israel and join the army is unbelievable. They have so many who have decided to cast their lot in Israel.
Is it higher than
it's
in the
higher,
past?
100% higher. I mean, I didn't do the data collection, but I can just tell you from my lay perspective, it is so much higher. I also want to say we at Maharat, we have this fellowship called Emerging Scholars, where we invite schools, teachers to nominate senior women to apply for a fellowship and for money that will go towards their education in Israel, towards their gap year studies. And as part of this process, they have to write essays about themselves as a leader, a religious leader. And what I've noticed is that those who are most committed to religious leadership, these American young women who are the most invested and involved in their schools, they love learning Gemara. They, are involved in Daf Yomi and women's tefillah or whatever their religious expression is. They see their future in Israel. I was surprised by that because for me, like the opportunity for leadership in America is so much more obvious, right? Like there's so many people doing the same kind of thing in Israel. But somehow these young women see their future enwrapped and tied to Israel. Somehow their religious expression is tied into actually also living there. And so I don't know what that means. I could tell you that on one hand, the future of, based on these essays that I read from these young women, like the future's in good hands. They're unbelievable. They have so much to contribute. And I hope that many of them go and find their home in Israel because that is, the modern Orthodox destiny. And I hope that many of them choose to make impact and create impact here as well because American Jews need that religious, passionate, high-level thinking and leadership and learning here as well.
That actually leads me to the next question. When Israel becomes so central to education and belief, does this create a certain sense of inferiority within American Orthodoxy compared to that in Israel, or on the contrary, a feeling that the community here succeeded in creating a different and perhaps more successful model of modern Orthodoxy?
It's a really important question, actually. I think there are ways in which you may be right, that there is this thinking that everything is a little bit higher in Israel, a little bit better. I think actually that should inspire the American community to do better as well. I am not in Jewish day schools in terms, I have my children are going through it, so I see from their perspective, but I actually think that the Gemara and the Limudei Kodesh curriculums could be better. I think that there is room for improvement, certainly for the girls. I think that there's almost like, laziness. I feel bad because I'm not in the schools, and so I'm really speaking from an outside perspective. And I know the people there are trying their hardest and are doing their best. But I think what I see is that the boys, and I have 4 boys, when they have opportunities outside of high school to invest time in learning, and that usually happens in Israel, that's where they get the bug. That's where they get the learning and exciting bug of wanting to stay in this world of learning Torah.
The special spice.
There's some kind of special spice. The girls don't have the same kind of opportunities in high school. It doesn't seem to come from their Gemara. There are wonderful programs. Drisha has a program on high school program, and I think they see it a little bit there, but it doesn't have the same... Yeah, I don't know what it is, that the modeling of religious fervor that seems so natural in Israel. And I think that should just be set us up to try harder and do it better.
A different angle in the relationship. In the current Knesset, unlike in any previous one, there's no political representation for moderate Orthodoxy. There's no longer the Mafdal or Jewish Home Party, and the 2 religious Zionist parties today are far right. Does this political reality affect modern Orthodoxy here in the U.S., which in many parts is more moderate?
We've just gone through this time of voting for the World Zionist movement. And 2 years ago, in the last round, there was a recognition that there was no moderate voice that could influence the Knesset. There was no moderate, modern Orthodox voice that cared about religious women and feminist ideals that were based and founded in Orthodox traditional ideals. And so there was a group of people who founded a organization that wanted to uplift some of these more inclusive values, Dorshe Torah V'Tzion. And the results aren't out yet, so I don't know how we did. But I guess what I'm saying is that Americans understood that we needed to create a institution that would influence and impact the Israeli community. And I hope we'll have that opportunity to sit in that room and have a space at the table and say, we're here. You're ignoring too many important voices by not creating a space at the table for Orthodox religious women who want to have a voice in determining the future of the country.
Let's talk about children, the future of the Jewish world. Some of my modern Orthodox friends, both in the U.S. and in Israel, people who lean liberal and have made, conscious choices to bend certain halachic boundaries, they often talk about this concern of the slippery slope. I mean, they've found a balance that works really well for them, a way to stay committed while being open. But at the same time, they sometimes ask themselves, how can we bend without pulling the thread too much? How do we make sure our kids will find that same balance? Because, what feels sustainable for them as adults might be much harder for the next generation to hold on to. What is your advice?
I don't think you can be a parent of growing adult children and not be thinking about this question. Intergenerational divergence is real. I have a different expression of my Judaism to my parents, and I think that still to be determined. But even from what I see now, my children are going to have different expressions than my husband Josh and I have. But what I see as, I wish I had the secret and the recipe for success, but I think grounding children, the joy of Torah and tradition, creating positive, Shabbat experiences in a really loving, open way, plus giving them the autonomy to make choices. I think we're very careful about not imposing who we are. I think about it a lot because I don't want my children to struggle because their mother has made choices about being a female rabbi, and I worry that they'll have to navigate that, and they are and they will. But I think what we've done is we've shown them that Josh and I don't agree on every topic, and we have lively, loving debates around our table. And so from a very early age, I think they've seen that there is no one way, but within a framework that we hope for our children, within like a parameter, we've shown them that there's a multiplicity of ways to be. An ethic that I've taught about, and I do impose on them, is that nobody should have emet. And I use that word very personally. Emet means truth, like with a capital Aleph, right? And I know that Orthodox Jews really believe they have emet, and I get it because I think my truth and the truth that I embrace is the way that we should walk through this world. But actually, I think that I want my children to know that it's possible to have multiple emets in the world, and actually our goal is to make room for hearing and thinking and accepting those multiple truths. I'm going to believe in my truth, like from here until tomorrow and every day after that, because it's who I am. It's from my toes all the way to my my head. I know it, and I know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has like bought into my emet. Like I really feel it. But I understand that the way I see the world might not be for everybody, and I don't want to impose it not only on others, but on my children.
I want to go back to one more paragraph of Professor Ed Feldman's book. He writes, and it relates to what you were talking about the conscious choices we make as liberal Jews. Modern Orthodoxy solved the theological problem it set out to confront in the 20th century, the challenge of modernity. But it has fewer or weaker answers to the theological problems of the 21st century, which are focused on the compatibility of Jewish tradition with liberal values. Modern Orthodoxy gave Jews a way to be modern and Orthodox. It does not seem poised to give them a way to be postmodern, progressive, and still Orthodox. What is your take on this argument?
This is my Torah. This is what I am trying to bring to the world. This is my core text, my core value, which is that it's possible. I already referenced it. I'll share it in this way. Yehuda Amichai, in one of his famous poems, shares the 10 Commandments as imagined by his dying father. And so he's imagining his Abba sharing with love, not in fear, not in lightning and thunder, the Aseret HaDibrot. And then his father says, but wait, there's an 11th commandment and a 12th. An 11th is don't change, lo tishtane, and the 12th is change. You must change. And I think that's where I exist, on holding onto the 11th and the 12th commandment and trying to find that space in between, which is, yes, we cannot change entirely. We have to hold on to our tradition, to the beauty of, why I chose to be a traditional Orthodox Jew, our rich text that is foundational to the way I choose to live my life. But our goal is to march into the 21st century. Halakha, the root of halakha is holech, is to walk, is to march, is to put one foot in front of the other, and to hold on to a vision of progression and the opportunity to employ that 12th commandment of changing. And that's not simple. It's actually much easier to either be all about change, or to be, fully in the 11th commandment or fully in the 12th commandment. It's much simpler life. It's much more complicated to hold.
Let me make it even a bit more complicated. I think about 3 major areas of possible tension between liberal progressive value systems and Orthodoxy. One is, of course, the role of women in synagogue and Jewish spiritual life. The second is the approach toward LGBTQ members of the Kehillah. And the third one is the tension between particularism and universalism. And obviously, you dedicated your life to bridge the first one, the place of women in prayer and public life. What is your approach and position on LGBTQ and the Orthodox Jewish community?
Well, it's the same value that I just shared, which is that you can't ignore halakha, you can't ignore tradition, and so you have to look deeply towards our tradition and our text, and from the place of our Torah, try to figure out how to navigate a path forward towards that 12th. It's complicated for everybody, and I feel sad that we as a Orthodox community have been slow in navigating the LGBTQ spaces and finding room for LGBTQ Jews to feel comfortable in our Orthodox shuls. But I think that, I want Yeshivat Maharat students to reflect what the Orthodox community looks like. And I want my graduates to be able to serve the diversity of pockets within the Orthodox community and beyond. And I think that just like not every synagogue is going to hire every one of my graduates, I believe there is a community and a job for my graduates, whether they're on the right or the left or in the center. And so in terms of LGBTQ, I want there to be rabbis who are the religious leaders who are there to serve not only Jewish community, but the LGBT community as well.
Do you think we will ever see an LGBTQ rabbi, as we saw first female rabbi?
Absolutely. I think we will.
It's out there.
Yeah.
Okay, we've reached the final part of our conversation, our famous Jewish Crossroads questionnaire. 5 quick and fun questions. Rabbi Hurwitz, shall we?
Yeah, I'm ready.
What's your earliest Jewish memory?
Coming home from Yom Kippur, I was little, but I thought I fasted, and just rushing into my home, which was filled with guests, and just biting that first rugelach.
If you could meet any Jewish figure from history, ancient or modern, who would it be and why?
I would love to have a conversation with Rabbania Regina Jonas, who was the first woman to become a rabbi. She was ordained in 1935 in Germany and unfortunately perished in the Shoah. I would love to have coffee with her and to hear about her experience, to compare and contrast our probably very similar and also very different experiences.
What is your favorite or most meaningful Jewish tradition?
I call myself a Yom Kippur Jew. It seems like there's a theme here. What an amazing opportunity just to pause, reflect, and to feel like you have another chance to try again and do it better.
We're on the same team. As a child, everyone liked Purim, and I loved Yom Kippur.
Yeah, what an amazing opportunity. It's crazy.
If you could jump 100 years into the future, what would you hope to see for the Jewish people?
Well, I hope we don't have to have these conversations. And I think everything we spoke about, I hope that we don't have to talk about how revolutionary Orthodox women are. I think it will just be part of the furniture, part of the fabric of our community. I hope we're not talking about polarization. My dream is for the community to figure out how to bridge all of our gaps, whether it's between Israel and the diaspora and just between Jews and Jews. There's not enough of us to be battling these topics. We got to come together and find ways to prop each other up and not pull each other down.
Last question. What's one Jewish word, Hebrew, English, Yiddish, whatever, that feels particularly meaningful to you right now?
Simcha. We've been talking a lot about just dressing things. And I think Judaism's at its best when you can find the joy in everything, whether it's our day-to-day celebrations, in the learning, but also to define Judaism by the joyous ways we celebrate, and not only the ways in which our community has suffered and struggled. I want to be a Simcha Jew.
Simcha. Rabbi Sara Hurwitz, thank you so much for this intriguing, wonderful conversation. Toda.
Thank you, Tamar.
That's it for this episode of Jewish Crossroads. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to write to us at jewishcrossroadspod@gmail.com. Thank you to Tomer Bar, who edited this chapter. We'll see you next time, same place, same journey, with a new voice. See you soon.